So we've had the creation of man, male and female, in the first part of the second account, and now in the second section we have the unmasking of human sinfulness. First is the fail of the human creature. Just to be clear, I think I mentioned this last week, I do not believe that Genesis chapter, what are we in, 2? The end of 2, or chapter 3, I guess. I do not believe that that teaches the traditional doctrine of the fall. So, just so you don't get confused, if you try to fit it into that paradigm, the things I'm saying aren't going to really make a whole lot of sense. God did, I mean, the traditional Christian conception is creation, fall, redemption. God created an absolutely perfect creation. In Adam and Eve, not only did they fall, but they brought all of creation into disorder, corruption, introduced corruption, death, destruction into the creation that was never intended, was never a part of the perfect creation that God initially created. But then Jesus comes along and redeems it. And at least in a lot of traditions, not only does he redeem mankind, but his death and resurrection and everything that God does through Jesus actually redeems all of the created order. So that's kind of the traditional paradigm. I don't think that's right. Not only do I not think that it's taught here, I don't think it's taught anywhere in the Bible. That the paradigm I'm working from is that God created a world that had built into it entropy and obsolescence. It was created with the laws of physics as they are now, which was not eternal, couldn't have been eternal, was never intended to be eternal. It was intended to be rather the first stage in a longer story that God was created, a longer narrative that God is creating. And mankind was not created perfect, but was created to be a creature who was prone to rebellion against God. And Genesis is an account of how the evil of mankind, the rebellion of mankind, is made manifest and is unmasked. Man comes to know himself as that rebel in this account that we're going to look at tonight. It's not that he moves from perfection to imperfection, it's that he comes to see and acknowledge and know his imperfection, and that's what we're actually reading the account of. So the garden is not the fall, the garden is the test that reveals mankind's inherent rebellion and evil. So different paradigm, so don't be confused by trying to fit it into the old paradigm, because I'm not working from that perspective. So I think what I'll do is just read it chunk at a time and then comment on it here. Now Ha-Nakash was more intelligent than any of the living creatures of the wild which the God Yahweh had made. That's usually translated, the serpent was more intelligent than any of the living creatures of the wild. By translating it that way, it gives this account in our English translations the flavor of ultimately it has the flavor, when we add things that are coming later, of a just so story. Stories about why do snakes crawl on their bellies, and why does it hurt to have children, and all those kinds of things. It has that flavor to it largely because of our English translation. I'm arguing that's not what we have here. This is not a myth, what some people call an atheological myth. That is a myth that explains the origin causes of things. This is just sober, straightforward, realistic history. I'm arguing that the author, at least, wants us to know that this is what actually went down at a certain point in history, in the history of mankind. This was the very first man, the very first woman, and this is what happened. So, do we have a talking snake then? I don't think so. What's interesting is when you go everywhere else in the Bible, and it talks about the deception, the fall, what's traditionally called the fall, the sin, the first sin, and the deception that occurred. The deception is always attributed to Satan. Only once in 2 Corinthians is it attributed to the serpent. Everywhere else, it's attributed to Satan. If you read this account, notice Satan is never mentioned at all. There's nowhere you can find Satan mentioned here. So why are they thinking Satan is anywhere in the text if he's not mentioned? It's a snake. It's a talking snake that did it, not Satan. Well, everybody knows that that was Satan. Well, did he come in the form of a talking snake? That's entirely possible, of course, but I think it's highly unlikely. I think what we're dealing with is a very ancient title for Satan. What was Satan called? The snake. And probably as a kind of metaphorical title that he has some quality, some snake-like quality about him that led them to title him the snake. That seems to get borne out in Revelation, when in Revelation it talks about the serpent of old, also known as Satan or the devil. Diabolos is the Greek word for Satan. Satan is the Hebrew word for Satan. And right there in Revelation, the point being made is that these seem to be synonymous titles, or at least that's one way to take it. And that's the one that makes the most sense to me. So that's what I think is going on here. And so rather than play into our traditional view that leads us astray, instead of translating it, I just transliterate it, leave it in the Hebrew. Now, Ha-Nakash was more intelligent than any of the living creatures of the wild. Okay, the objection is, well, why is he classing them with the animals then, if it's Satan rather than a serpent? He says he's more intelligent than any of the living creatures of the wild. That's true, but look at the account. Who are the characters up till now? Adam, Eve, and animals. So the only two creatures so far that could even carry on a conversation are Adam and Eve. You can't carry on the conversation with the animals, but we're going to have a creature come along who's going to carry on a conversation with Eve. We need some kind of explanation for how this Ha-Nakash could even have a conversation. Well, he's not a dumb animal. He's an intelligent being, an intelligent personal being. So the author is just cueing us in that we haven't mentioned this character, but there is this character, Ha-Nakash, who was not a dumb animal described in the account earlier, but is actually also an intelligent being. I think that's all he means by this. Now, Ha-Nakash was more intelligent than any of the living creatures of the wild, which the God Yahweh had made. Now he said to Adam's wife, what is it that the God has in fact said? That from each and every tree in the garden you are not to eat? Now I've tried to leave it to match the syntax of the original language, but let me paraphrase it, because I think what he's saying is, has God said that you can't eat from all the trees in the garden? In other words, has he put some restriction here? God has limited you to some extent? And her answer is yes. Adam's wife said to Ha-Nakash, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we shall eat, but the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, the God has said, you shall not eat from it, nor touch it, lest you die. So her point is, and it's accurate, we can eat from every tree of the garden, except there's one we can't eat from. He's only told us that there's one. Now, some interpreters make a big deal out of the fact that she adds, nor touch it. I don't know whether that's a big deal or not. I would maintain that Eve, we don't have any record of God ever directly commanding Eve with respect to the tree. She doesn't have any direct information from God. So she apparently is getting it from Adam. It's entirely possible that Adam has, in order to emphasize and protect things, has himself added to it. Now, Eve, don't eat from that tree. Don't even touch it. I don't even want you touching that tree, because that we're not supposed to do that. We will die if we do that. So it's possible that Adam originates the hedge around the law at this point and expands it. It's possible that Eve is just extrapolating, but if she is, it's a fairly innocent extrapolation, I think. I know a lot of Bible teachers like to suggest that it's kind of undermining the goodness of God and exaggerating exaggerating the fact that he's prohibiting you in some way, limiting you in some way. But nothing is done in the text with that. So I'm inclined to think that even if it's an extrapolation on Adam or Eve's part, it's a relatively innocent one. I don't think it makes much difference. But so in any case, she's rightly saying, if we eat of it, we will die, God said. Hanakash said to Adam's wife, you shall not be condemned to die the death. Now, that's a strange translation to your ears, I'm sure. Most English translations follow the Masoretic Hebrew text. The Masoretic Hebrew text is the Hebrew text that most people have and own and read if they're reading the Hebrew Bible at all. And arguably, the Masoretic text, you shall certainly not die, is the way they take it. The Masoretic text is literally, dying, you shall not die. There's a absolute infinitive along with the verb. So dying, you will not die, and they take that as an idiom for you most certainly will not die. If you look at the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, however, it reads, there is different ways to take it, but I think the most reasonable way to take the Greek text is, you shall not die in the death, in the Greek text. And if you look at the Hebrew text, if you know anything about Hebrew, the Hebrew text that we have, the Masoretic text, is what they call a pointed text. Hebrew is just a consonantal language. You just have consonants. Later in the history of after Jesus, about 1000 AD, the Masoretes came along, and from the memory of the reading of the text, they add vowels. And they add vowels in the form of these little points, dots and dashes above and below the consonants. Well, the question is, did they get that right or did they get that wrong? I mean, the text that we really want to know what it means doesn't have vowels at all. It just has consonants. Well, what is pointed as an absolute infinitive in the Hebrew could also just be a noun if you point it differently. And if it's a noun, then it would explain the Greek translation, because that's what the Greek translation has. You will not die the death. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. That makes more sense to me than you will certainly not die. It presupposes that there is a death that is the end point of the existence of every human being as God is speaking to them. All the animals are going to die. Everything in God's creation is going to die. I mean, you can see why most English translators are attracted to the other way of taking it, because they can't presuppose that. They have the creation, fall, redemption model. So of course there was no death to start with. Well, in my model there is. From the very get-go, from the very creation, we were created to die. The question for human beings is not, are you going to die? The questions for human beings is, are you going to stay dead after you die? That's the issue. Or will God be merciful and grant you life beyond the grave? Well, the test is, or the penalty that God is announcing to Adam and Eve, if you eat of this tree, then you will die the death. It's what in Revelation is called the second death. Not only will you die, but you will go to your destruction after death. You will die the second death. But if you don't go to destruction after your second death, then you wouldn't die the death. If you disobey me and eat from this tree, you will die the death, the second death. You will go to destruction, and that will be your end. Okay. Is that questions on that? Is that clear? Okay, so you shall not be condemned to die the death, a direct contradiction of God. Absolutely indirect, just flat out contradiction. God said you will, Satan says, no, you won't. No, you won't. You won't die the death. Indeed, the God knows that in the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be ones who know good and evil as the God does. Now, traditionally, at least when I was growing up, I took this to be God being jealous. He doesn't want any competition. He doesn't want anyone to be as wise and knowing and understanding that he is. So he's telling them not to eat of the tree because the tree would make them know good and evil like he does. He doesn't want any rivals, so he's going to penalize that with death. Something along those lines. That, of course, in order to make any sense out of that at all, requires that the tree be some kind of magical tree that has some kind of super magical juice in the fruit, and that if you eat of the fruit of this tree, it transforms you magically from an ordinary finite human being into a godlike being, a godlike creature who knows good and evil the way God does. Okay, maybe. Don't think so. I think this is sober, realistic history, so we have to make sense out of what Satan is saying without resorting to kind of an ad hoc magical explanation. You shall not be condemned to die the death. Why won't you be condemned? What he's going to argue in support of his contention, no, that won't happen. And the key is God going to condemn you to that fate? I think that it's key to understanding what he's saying here. God would not condemn you to die the death. Why would God not condemn you to die the death? Because he knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be ones who know good and evil as God does. The key to understanding this whole thing, I think, is to realize how incredibly deceitful and incredibly seductive his argument is. His argument is, you won't die the death because don't you know that God will be tickled pink if you eat from that tree? Don't you realize how delighted he would be if you would eat from that tree? Why? Because why would you eat from that tree? He told you not to eat from the tree. Why would you eat from that tree? The only way you would eat from that tree is if you had gained the experience, the knowledge, the understanding, and the confidence that you can decide for yourself whether that fruit is good to eat or not. You will be mature. You will be grown up. You won't be a baby where God has to tell you, don't touch that hot stove. Don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do that other thing. It's babies that need commands all the time, right? Where somebody else has to tell them what's good and what's not good. God is just waiting for the day for you to grow up and be mature enough that you can decide that for yourself, and you won't be a baby any longer. So God won't condemn you for eating from the tree. He's going to go, yay, finally. All right, my creature has arrived. My creature has become like us in knowing good and evil. Now, what does he mean by us? My creature has got to a point where the creature can decide from his or her own standpoint whether something is good or something is evil. That's how I decide it. God decide it. He will be like me in that respect. And Satan is implying that that would be a good thing, not only a good thing, but a thing that God would be pleased with. So you won't be condemned to die the death. Why would you be condemned? God will be delighted. Now the wife, now notice what she does immediately. She decides from her own standpoint now whether she should eat of the tree. Now the wife saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes. And further, the tree was desirable to make one wise. So indeed, taking the fruit of it, she ate. What does it mean? She saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes. Well, the tree that has been forbidden is no different than all the other trees of the garden. Nothing in the account describes it as being at all distinguishable from the other trees, except it's the one in the middle of the garden. Its location is the only thing that's ever made distinctive. And when God prohibits from eating of it, he says, from the tree in the middle of the garden, don't eat from that. So she's been eating the fruit of trees that are identical to the fruit on this tree for we know not how long. She has experience with it. It's nutritious and it's tasty. It's good for food and it's a delight to the eyes. And furthermore, the tree was desirable to make one wise. She's thinking like the serpent has got her to think about the whole project in a different kind of way. What if God isn't really serious about saying, don't you eat of it or you will die, that it's just a test? And what is he testing? He's testing to see what level of wisdom you have arrived at. So the tree is desirable to manifest you and show you as wise if you will recognize it for what it is and act accordingly from your own experience, your own knowledge, your own understanding, and your own standpoint. So she basically takes the bait and says, yeah, I want to do this to show God that I am wise. Look at the subtlety of Satan's temptation. He's managed to take something that is evil and convince Eve that if she were to do it, it would actually be good to do. Something that is displeasing to God, convinced her to see it as something that will please God. I think Eve thinks she's being pleasing to God by doing what she's doing. So she took it, she ate it, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Paul in 1 Timothy 2 comments, Adam was not deceived, but the woman being quite deceived fell into transgression. I wish we had more information, but we don't. All we know is that Eve comes to Adam, says, I ate from that tree. It's good. It's just like the other stuff. Should be no reason we can't eat this. Why don't you have some? And lo and behold, Adam ate. And I think we're going to see from the account that follows that Adam gets a harsher treatment than Eve does. Eve was deceived. Adam just flat out said, okay, I'll disobey. And I think God responds to him accordingly. He's more culpable than she is. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. Then they sewed together fig leaves and made loincloths for themselves. Yeah.
Was it after Adam ate that their eyes were both opened? Or what happens between the time that Eve eats and offers it to Adam? Are her eyes opened? Is she then ashamed? Gosh, I better have him do this too, otherwise I'll be alone in this predicament. We just don't know.
We just don't have any information about that. I'm assuming there's not a significant amount of time that's lapsed. I'm not sure that makes any difference, but I mean, if we go by what the text says, it would seem to suggest that it didn't dawn on them that they were naked until both of them had participated in this transgression. And maybe it was actually Adam's transgression, which was the more egregious of the two, that finally they realized what have we done, and who are we?
So she wasn't actively trying to deceive Adam.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think she's still deceived herself. God will be pleased. God should be pleased with us for doing this. Here, join me in doing this thing that's pleasing to God. I think she's still deceived.
Okay.
So does, let's say the temptation was that you get to be like God in the sense that you get to decide for yourself what's good and what's evil. That's the temptation. Does that require that the tree have some sort of magical juice to it?
No, I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
No.
It's interesting to me that once the serpent or Satan presents with her with this idea that indeed God knows that in the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be the ones who know good and evil from as God does. That's what he's offering. And then it's right then that the perspective of the wife, the tree doesn't change. It's the same tree, but the perspective of the tree changes in this within the woman. How she sees it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's true. What I'm proposing is that the mistake Satan's deception is a little bit more subtle. He's not coming along and saying, I mean, I think I understand now what you're saying by you can define for all of the universe what's right and what's wrong.
But for yourself.
Okay.
You're not limited by God now telling you
right.
what you can do and what you can't do.
Right.
The one thing you can't do.
My only objection to that is I don't think that's subtle enough.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm Eve, hey Eve, why are you letting God tell you what to do? He shouldn't be allowed to tell you what to do. I think she's in a position to realize, well, God is God and I'm the creature. I don't think there's anything particularly subtle about that. Right. So how vulnerable would she be to falling for that?
Well, I think he is saying, though, that there's something that's going to happen. Your eyes will be opened and you will be the one. So there's going to be this thing that happens.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not being clear about that.
Okay.
I don't think he's saying, if you do this, the result will be your eyes will be opened. I think what he's saying, on the day that you do it, why will you do it? Because your eyes will have been opened, and you will know good and evil like God does. You will already have come to a point where you're looking at it differently. So instead of looking at it, God says no, so I can't do it. You're going, well, there's no real good reason why God said no, so I think I can do it. And that must be, and then that's where Satan just subtly tweaks it. And that must be what God is waiting for. He's trying to, he's created this artificial test to see when I will know good and evil as he does, and so that I will recognize he doesn't really want me to be prohibited from eating it. He wants me to see for myself that would just be arbitrary. Of course I can eat it. I ate from the tree right next to it. Why can't I eat from that one? I don't know if I'm being clear, but you see how subtly different that is?
Yeah, it is. It's like this really good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Whereas the other would be, she'd have to make a decision. Am I going to be God, or is God going to be God? It's harder to make the sell that you being God rather than God being God is a good thing. But it's a lot easier to make the sell. God has defined good and evil. He always defines good and evil. And shouldn't you be able to see for yourself from your own standpoint what's good and evil?
Well, yeah.
God wants you to do that.
Okay, that's the extra piece. God wants you to do
that. Yeah. That's, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not at all sold.
You're still what?
Not at all sold.
Okay.
That's the way to see this.
Okay.
Since we're started as fallen or even evil human beings, it seems to follow that, well, we would fall for this. I would fall for this. Sometimes not, but yeah, why not? We as humans want to be bigger and better than we are.
Yeah.
So it just really makes sense that she would be tempted by that. And you see it as something that needs to be more subtle, but that's just because you're especially bright, Jack. I think you're coming from that especially bright place. I don't know if Eve was especially bright or not, but just regular old human being could fall for this and it wouldn't be so unsubtle to them.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, and I can't argue with that. I mean, we are depraved, we are perverse creatures, and in the right kind of circumstances, hey, why don't you be God, Jack, is appealing, is interesting. So I can't argue with that. I think part of what...
In fact, Jack, it seems like that would even be more appealing or more demonstrative of the sinfulness of human beings from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so obvious, and she's just going for it, and it looks so regular depraved. You know what I'm saying?
Maybe. Part of what I'm trying to account for is, why does the account not come down harder on Eve? Because if that's what she's doing, that's about as bad as you can get. Hey, Eve, don't let God be God. Why don't you be God? Okay, yeah, I'm going to be God. I'm going to defy him, and I'm going to do what he said not to do, and I'll decide for myself. I mean, that's about as perverse as you can get as you're arguing. You would think that she'd get blasted for that, but the one that gets treated more harshly is Adam, not Eve. In fact, I'm going to argue that what the text goes on to say is, Eve, I'm going to show you mercy.
But there seems in the New Testament to be this, I know this is not a politically correct statement, but more favor toward women than toward men. Men seem to have a greater responsibility. And it would follow that would be true back here also.
Yeah. So that the harsher treatment is due to the fact that he's the head of the relationship.
Yeah.
Could be.
It seems more consistent.
Could be. I mean,
women just don't.
That's how I've always looked at it in the past. So yeah, that could be.
So if Adam hadn't eaten the apple, but Eve did, would there have been a punishment?
I think things would have gone differently. Yeah. On either the view that Christine is espousing or what I'm saying, I think that could still follow. And I'm inclined to think that if Adam had said, Eve, let's think about this further. This is not a good thing. Then I think things would have gone very differently. But it's not what happened.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to understand the subtlety. I just think I'm not getting it. So I'm wondering if my question, I'm not sure, is when the scripture says you will know good and evil as God does. I think I don't really understand what that means. So part of my question is, does it mean you will see good and evil as God does? You will know good and evil as God does? You will decide good and evil as God does? I'm not getting...
You will know and decide the same way God knows and decides. Okay. Namely, from his own resources of knowledge and experience. I mean, God's case, experience doesn't seem to be relevant, but from the resources of his own wisdom and understanding based on who he is. Eve, why don't you know and decide what is right and what is wrong based on your own resources for understanding, based on who you are and what your experience has made you to be.
So
aren't you a person who's eaten from this tree over here? And it was fine, right? Tasted good, it's nutritious, no problem there. Why don't you use that information, use the resources of that knowledge to make a decision about this tree?
But is Satan twisting it? Because, I mean, God has said if you do this, you will die.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I'm really not getting this. So God isn't saying, it's not about experience, it's about them defying God from God's perspective.
Well, see, that's the subtlety. What if defying God can be twisted and tweaked so that you look at your defiance of God as being something that would please God rather than displease him?
Okay, I did hear you say that, but I guess when you say experience, I mean, originally when God spoke to them, he was saying, he wasn't talking about experience, he was talking about, if you do this thing, this means you're a rebel and you're going to die. But Satan is taking that and looking at it completely differently, right?
There's only two things that are completely different.
Mm-hmm.
God said, on the day that you eat of it, you'll die. That ain't true. That's not true. And then secondly, why is that not true? Don't you understand that doing that would not displease him, it will please him? Those are the only two things that he's changing. The rest of it is exactly like God said. What God doesn't want is for Eve to decide, from my own experience and my own standpoint, there shouldn't be any reason that I can't eat from that tree, so I'm gonna. That's precisely what he doesn't want her to do, because he has explicitly told her not to.
I guess my point is, just up until this point, she hasn't had any experience of knowing good and evil apart from what God has told her, correct?
No, I think she does.
Oh, I'm confused, sorry.
Well, the tree right next to it. From her own experience, she knows it's okay to eat from that. She hasn't been aware of her evil? Yeah, okay. That's true. Okay.
What I like about the is this on? Okay, good. What I like about the your interpretation is that it makes Satan far more deceptive, far more dangerous, and how we can be so easily duped, and it makes her fall too more understandable for me.
Exactly.
And so that's really interesting, and it also makes everybody accountable individually, because I have a problem with the how predictable, the whole head thing. I mean, I get it, and but still,
yeah.
Are we or are we not created equal, and are we not, going to be held accountable equally? And right. This gives different weight for different reasons. And
right.
That deception part, though, I think is valid, really, really good.
Yeah, thank you.
So I was thinking about what you're saying here, and it's like being like God is like sharing in the experience of God. That's the subtlety.
So say that again.
It's like you're going to be like God. He's saying you'll be like God. So because God decides what's right and wrong, you're going to share in this experience in a way that's like God shares it, says what's good. You're going to have that experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what he means by you'll be like God.
That's what I'm saying.
You'll be God-like.
Yeah.
Him. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Thanks, Jack. I realize that what I'm about to say is not what you have been saying.
Okay.
This is different from what you've been saying, but I'm curious to hear what you think about it specifically, like what your response to it would be. At least in the English translation, it's hard for me to not see the Satan's temptation as having this element, and her response as having this element of that he's at least painting the picture that the tree is going to create some change in the situation.
Yeah, in the English translation, I don't know how you would. Different. Yeah.
And so what I'm wondering if that could also be part of his deception. He's painting this picture of God's holding out on you. There's sort of this bigger, more expansive way of being a person that God is waiting for you to discover. And this tree that he's told you not to have. So it's bringing in elements of what you're saying, that he is painting this picture of God's told you not to have it, but what you don't get is, like he's telling her, what you don't get is that when you eat of it, it's actually going to make you more like God. It's going to make you wiser. Well, I mean, you'll be wise if you do it, but it's going to create this change, and that's going to make you more like God, and that's a good thing. Like that's kind of it would be the implication. So I wonder what your response to that would be. Could there be something going on there that it's not that the tree actually is magical, but that Satan is kind of playing on her imagination and that tendency toward, well, maybe God's holding something out on me.
Making her think that there's some power in the tree?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would, I mean, it seems to me like humans are susceptible to the unknown and like what the mysterious, and this is certainly like mysterious. Why has God said that this tree is off limits? Maybe there's something kind of special about it.
Well, I think the reason I lean in the direction that I do is, immediately following, let's see, where'd it go? Immediately after Ha-Nakash says what he says, now the wife saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes. She's doing exactly what Satan says. Isn't that what you want to do? Mm-hmm. So I would argue she's never looked at the tree that way before. She's never even asked herself, is the fruit good? Is the fruit of that tree good for food, and is it a delight to the eyes? Why would you ask yourself that question? You're not supposed to eat it. I mean, it's a settled question. Well, all of a sudden, Satan has suggested maybe it's not a settled question. Mm-hmm. Maybe you need to look and see from your own standpoint, from your own experience. You look and see. And so she does. Whoa! It's nothing wrong with that fruit. God prohibiting that is totally arbitrary, and it was. I mean, that's the key. It was totally arbitrary. So she recognizes that it's totally arbitrary, and then what Satan wants her to do with the fact that it's arbitrary is, so he really doesn't not want you to. He really doesn't want to prohibit it. Why would he do that? It's arbitrary. Well, the reason he wants to do it is it's a test. That's why he wants to do it. But and that's the other subtlety. Okay, it's a test, but it's a test to see if you will arrive as a person who can see for themselves and act out of what you see for yourself, rather than have God dictate what you will and will not do. And that will be a good thing, Satan, I think, is subtly suggesting. But so I don't think anything, I mean, I see what you're saying, that it's not a magical juice in there, but Satan is wanting to plant that idea in her mind. But anything that would actually make it a magical juice turns the whole account into something that it isn't, I think. It's a fairy tale, it's fantasy, it's talking about something totally unrealistic. And I think we can't go that direction, because I think this is history.
Yes, notion just to suggest, perhaps. Thank you. That maybe not so much arbitrary, but maybe Hashem, God, had a different notion that he had always intended to share that fruit with Adam and Eve. He simply was waiting.
Yes.
He had a different he was waiting actually perhaps for the first Shabbos.
Yeah,
he was waiting to commemorate a Sabbath, and he was waiting, and that was the real test.
I think that's right.
There's nothing in creation from Hashem that he wouldn't share.
Right.
Why would he make something that he wouldn't want it to share?
Hashem is God, by the way.
Hashem's
Gentiles.
God, God and the Sabbath and these things. Yes. So this is just, rather than the arbitrary idea, maybe there was an ulterior, there was a motive and a plan, and he was just simply waiting to share it. He wanted them to wait.
Yeah, in the book of Revelation, in the very last chapter of the book of Revelation, the tree of life is planted in the city of Jerusalem, and you eat from the tree of life. It wasn't going to be prohibited forever and ever. It was always his intention that at least his people, his children, the ones that he's going to take with him into eternity, it was their destiny to eat from the tree of life. So yeah, exactly.
So I heard you just say that God wanted them to arrive at it on their own, but he created a test he knew that they were going to fail. So why was the test recreated for us so we could have the story?
Well,
because why else do that? It seems like a bad dating story.
The knowledge of good and evil is our knowledge, not God's knowledge. God knows good and well that they're evil. He created them that way.
Right.
But Adam and Eve, in fact, I think that's the significance of their eyes were opened and they realized that they were naked. What's that mean? All of a sudden they realized they had something to be ashamed about. And I think that comes from the fact that I think built into us, until we learn otherwise and get it brutalized out of us, our nakedness represents psychologically to us in our psyche. It represents my very self.
And this was more necessary than just saying you're screwed up? Like just telling them from the get-go? Yeah,
because don't we learn a lot better and more deeply from our experience rather than words?
I mean, I guess.
I've just been looking at Peter's vision in Acts, where the sheet with unclean animals is lowered down, and God says, "Eat." Says, "I've never eaten anything unclean. What I call holy, let no one call unholy." And I ask myself the question: why doesn't God just send an angel and say, "Peter, you got some learning to do here. Gentiles are not inherently unclean in the way that you think they are." Could have said that. And by the way, I'm sending some Gentiles, let him in the house and show him some hospitality. He could have done that. Mm-hmm. But his whole life his whole life he's been eating kosher, his whole life.
Right.
And I know from my own Baptist kind of kosher that I grew up with that the scruples that you have go really, really, really deep. They go deep. And they need to be shocked out of you sometimes. I'll never forget, I mean, a little bit of self-revelation here, but everything was wrong in my experience. You don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't, well, we did play cards, but we don't do anything. Wow. I remember babysitting for my older brother and finding a pipe on his shelf. I can't explain how absolutely devastated I was. My brother smokes a pipe, and that's just how deep it goes. But that was one of the most important experiences in my life. I had to then rethink the difference between actual moral values and cultural values, values that are imposed on top of. And I had to, I was pretty young, but in my own young kind of way, I had to begin to rethink all that. Well, it wouldn't have done any good at all for someone to come along and say, Jackie, there's a difference between moral values and cultural values. And get over it. You know, it just wouldn't have had the same impact. I had to have an experience.
So God from the get-go wanted to make our lives difficult.
Well, that's true. That's true too.
So before they ate from the tree, had Adam or Eve done anything that was evil, but they just didn't know it?
I think so.
So they dropped puppies from cliffs every day, and didn't know it was, I mean, but I'm saying something like, I mean, was there something like that they did? I'm just trying to think, what do you do in the Garden of Eden that could be evil? Okay, bunnies. And they didn't know it was evil until...
You grab a pomegranate and eat it when Eve was saving that for herself.
Okay, sure.
You don't share.
And you don't share, yeah. I mean, all the ways that just inherent in our humanity, we are so self-serving and self-centered, and we can be sarcastic and cruel and all that. I mean, we can't know to what extent they had learned evil and had developed evil habits and so on. But they had all the resources to be just as evil as we are, I think.
Do you think?
But they weren't psychopaths yet.
Right.
That's chapter 4.
Yeah. After having eaten the fruit, did they then realize that, oh, I shouldn't take the pomegranate from her when she was saving it?
Well, I don't know. That,
I mean, is that?
I kind of doubt it. I doubt if it was that instantaneous. I mean, isn't that something that we have to grow into, a wisdom that we have to grow into over time? I think it was the explicit, overt, dramatic disobedience to God.
It's the only thing they've been told not to do. It's the only thing that they would have any reference for good or evil. If that's the only thing they've been told not to do, that was evil,
exactly,
and they did it, open the floodgates.
Right.
I feel shame. Gosh, I'm naked. Now I shouldn't steal.
Remember Paul's argument in chapter 5? Nevertheless, he said, death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of Adam's offense. So Adam had an explicit command, don't do it. You don't really get that again until Moses, where you have explicit commands, do this and don't do this. But Paul's point is, does that mean everybody in between was good and innocent and acceptable?
Because they didn't.
No, they were under the doom of death for their evil, for their sinfulness.
Okay.
Okay, help me think through this real quick. So God in knowing good and evil and in establishing the bounds of good and evil, the picture that I have is not that God is declaring what things are good and what things are evil out of his own good pleasure, but that there is an absolute good, there is an absolute evil, there is a moral, there are moral values. God in his wisdom understands what is good and what is evil and ratifies what is good.
Okay, I think I follow.
Okay. So with Eve, and then it's not that the test is to become like God in being able to decide for yourself what is good and what is evil. The test is being able to show yourself as one who, like God, can identify what is good and what is evil and ratify what is good. Right?
Yeah, but I can see where part of the confusion is coming. Is there anything evil about eating the fruit of the tree of life? No. I mean, I think that's this gentleman's point.
Right.
In the long run, God wants us to eat of the tree of life.
Right.
So it's not intrinsically evil. It's just something God said not to do.
No, the evil is shining God on.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I've never thought about. I hadn't thought about that before. But right from the get-go, notice what is happening here. The very first transgression has nothing to do with what we normally think of as morality. It has everything to do with my attitude toward God and my relationship to God, which is the root of all immorality and all sin and all transgression. Is having the wrong attitude, the wrong orientation to God. That's what's being tested.
Okay.
Is their orientation toward God.
Right.
Now, does that change anything about
No. So my question then is, so what is being highlighted here? Is it that we are so very poor at judging what is good and what is evil? Or is it that we are so very poor at ratifying what is good, knowing what is good and knowing what is evil? We have such a hard time actually, ratifying the good as God does consistently.
I'm having a hard time knowing how to answer it in the terms that you ask it. Let me put it this way. What was the first choice you gave me?
Well, is what's being highlighted that Eve and therefore human beings are such poor judges of what is good and what is evil.
Yeah,
and hence we need to submit to God.
Yeah, I don't think that's what's being highlighted because actually her judgment was fine. It was good to eat and a delight to the eye, and there should be absolutely no reason in the world why a human being can't eat it.
So
her judgment's fine. It's her propensity to shine God on that's being highlighted. Why would the human creature so readily be willing to say, God said not to do it, but that can be overruled by my own experience and my own standpoint here. Why would you allow that to overrule what God has explicitly commanded you and what God has explicitly prohibited? Why would you shine that on, set that aside, and just go with your own knowledge and understanding? That's the problem with mankind.
So it's her failure to ratify the good when she knows good and well what it is.
Well, see, I mean, you're making it hard for me to answer because it sounds like to ratify the good would be to ratify his prohibition. It's not a matter of finding it difficult to ratify his prohibition. It's finding it difficult, in fact impossible, to take his prohibition seriously, regardless of what the prohibition is. See, it's not a matter of her from her own standpoint going, you know what, it really would be bad for me to eat that fruit. What she should have done is, I don't have a clue why he doesn't want me to eat that fruit right now, but he said not to, and I am a servant of God. I'm a creature who needs to live my life in obedience to my Creator.
So, see, that then seems to put the emphasis on the first option, that she's really having a hard time seeing good and evil in the situation.
Okay, I wouldn't have said so. See, as I'm looking at this, it's eating of the fruit in and of itself is not a good or evil at all.
Right.
Right. So it really comes down to when you, when God explicitly commands you, is that significant enough that you just do what he has commanded?
Mm-hmm.
And her answer to that is, well, no. And especially, that's Adam's answer to it.
Yeah.
No. I mean, even more so than Eve. His Adam is, no, I'll eat it. But God commanded. Yeah.
She didn't have it.
Hmm?
She's not dead.
Yeah, although I don't think that's the way to understand the thing. I think it's, I condemned it, I translated it, condemned to die the death. So I think probably from the get-go they realize you won't die immediately, but yeah.
So as a reader or a writer, I'm looking at this particular structure that we have here. Satan says there's two things, right? One is you're not going to die, and the other is you're going to be you'll know the knowledge of good and evil. And Eve's response is essentially two things. Number one, it looks good and it's a delight to the eyes. That's one thing. That's sort of a similar kind of thing. And the second one is I'm going to be wise, right? So it strikes me is that the response, it's a delight to the eyes and good to eat, is a direct response to the question is, are you going to die? In the same way that I'm going to be wise is a direct response to you're going to be wise. If you look at the structure of that as a reader and a writer, I would think those two go together in both the statement of Satan and the response of Eve, and it would be a natural thing for a reader to assume that those things go together like that. I don't know, what's your thoughts on that?
It doesn't resonate with me. I mean, I see what you're saying. You could create that structure and impose that, but it doesn't. That's not how it reads to me. Because as I see it, the wife saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes, is related to God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be ones who know good and evil as the God does. So she's going about trying to know good and evil as the God does.
So how does the delight to the eyes relate to knowing good and evil?
Well, the good and evil here, I think, is the appropriateness or lack of appropriateness of eating the fruit. I think it's standing in for that. Can I eat it or can I not eat it? Should I eat it or should I not eat it? If it's good, then I should eat it. If it's evil, I don't think it has the full weight of evil the way we normally think of that. If it's evil, then I shouldn't eat it.
Well, I guess it's tough because it seems to me like you're saying that I'm imposing the structure on the text, and I could equally say back to you, you're imposing this particular understanding of the subtleties that is necessary and this kind of thing. So
yeah, we all do that.
Right. So I mean, I don't know how you would break that down. I mean, it seems like both of us are going to impose something. The question is, which one does the text seem to be more structurally sound? And if I was just a reader and I was looking at it, that seems like that would be a natural kind of a way of seeing it.
It would only make sense if the death is a physical death, right? Makes you biologically inviolable.
Well, if you understood it that way, right? If Eve understood it that way, right? True.
What I'm arguing is, I think from the get-go, they're understanding that we're talking about the final outcome of your existence. Are you going to die the death, or are you not going to die the death? Now, if I'm wrong about that, then I'm wrong about this. But if I'm right about that, then you see why that wouldn't fit for me.
Right. So I was going back all the way to that assumption at the very beginning.
Right.
How do you know that that's the correct assumption?
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time. Let me go quickly to the God's response, because I don't want to leave that out entirely. They heard the voice of God Yahweh as he was walking in the garden in the evening of the day, and Adam and his wife hid in the midst of the trees of the garden from the sight of God Yahweh. And the God Yahweh called out to Adam and said to him, "Adam, where are you?" And he said, "I heard your voice when you were walking in the garden, and I became afraid because I was naked, so I hid." It's his guilt and shame that is at the root of this. I won't get into the relationship between nakedness and shame. We can, just for the sake of time. He said to him, "Who told you that you were naked? You have not eaten from the tree about which I instructed you about that one alone, that you were not to eat from it, have you?" So God knows immediately. The only reason he would know he's naked is because he's been disobedient, and that now he's experiencing guilt and shame. Adam said, "The wife whom you gave to be with me, that one gave to me from the tree, and I ate." And the God Yahweh said to his wife, "Why have you done this?" And the wife said, "Hanakash deceived me, and I ate." The God Yahweh said to, he goes all the way back to, where did this first enter? Well, it was Satan. So now he's going to do it in reverse order. He's going to respond to Satan, and then Eve, and then Adam. Now, we typically call these God's curses. I don't think that's the right way to read this. In the case of Adam, I think arguably there are curses, if what you mean by that is God is specifically, deliberately going out of his way to exact a punishment on Adam, but only Adam gets any punishment. The rest of the things that are being said are not punishments, they're predictions. That is, you had this test. Is you good or is you evil? Whoa, you're evil. Well, let me predict then how human history is going to go. Given that you are evil, then here's what you can expect. And most of what God says to Eve, at least, is just a prediction of what she can expect given the evil of human beings. Of course, what he says to Satan is also a curse, is a punishment. So let's take that first. Because you have done this and are cursed above and beyond, you are cursed above and beyond all the tameable animals and all the living creatures of the wild. You will approach on your stomach and you will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. It will crush your head, that is, it being the seed of the woman, will crush your head, yet you will crush it, the seed of the woman's heel. Okay. To understand what he's saying here, I think we have to get this picture of approaching on your stomach and eating dust all the days of your life. If you go to Egyptian, various Egyptian, what do you call them? Yeah. You often have a picture of the Pharaoh sitting on his throne, his feet on the shoulders of, we know they're conquered enemies, who are flat on their stomachs on the ground with their face in the dirt, and he's got his feet on their shoulders. It's a posture that they are required to take to signify their abject humiliation and defeat. They are completely and thoroughly defeated by Pharaoh. Pharaoh has defeated them. Realize the promise that's made to King David and therefore to Jesus. I will put your enemies as a footstool for your feet. I'm going to bring utter humiliation and defeat to your enemies. The enemies of the Son of God are going to be completely and totally defeated. I think that's exactly the image that's being used here. You, Satan, are going to be a defeated enemy all the days of your life, defeated by the seed of the woman. And you're going to lick the dust, because your face is going to be in the dust, and you're going to be on your stomach. I think that's the image. So what is he cursing him with? Complete and total defeat. Satan was trying to defeat humanity, and by defeating humanity, defeat God. And God is saying, you know what? I know that's what you want, Satan, but you are going to know nothing but defeat for your whole existence. So because you have done this thing and you are cursed above and beyond all the tameable animals and all the living creatures of the wild, Satan, you are not going to be exalted. You're going to be lower than the animals. I'm going to shame you and humiliate you and make you more, inglorious than the animals are. You will approach on your stomach and you will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. Okay, well, this is a theme that you see throughout the Bible. There are the children, usually it's in terms of the children of God and the children of the devil. The offspring of Satan are the children of the devil. The offspring of God are those people who are born of God into righteousness. They're being sanctified by God. They march to the beat of a different drum, and there's enmity between the children of God and the children of devil. First John has very strong themes of that. Jesus spoke to that. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. So basically, the offspring of the woman here are taking the place of what elsewhere in the Bible are called the offspring of God, the children of God. Very interesting. These are the children of God that are the offspring of Eve. It will crush your head, and you will crush its heel. Now, traditionally, a lot of interpreters translate it, he will crush your head, yet you will crush his heel, because they take it as a reference to Jesus, the Messiah. Could be, but it could also refer, it's just a pronoun, and the pronoun could very easily refer back to the offspring, and I would argue that's what it means, and I would take as support the way Paul takes it. Because in Romans 16, in a little benediction, he says, may God crush Satan under your heel. May God crush Satan's head under your heel, or something like that. Clearly a reference to this, however it goes. And, you want to say, Paul, but it's Jesus who's going to do that, right? No, it's you believers in Rome. God will crush his head under your feet. What does that mean? Satan is going to try to deceive you in exactly the same way that he deceived Eve. But you must have victory. 1 John describes your victory over the world. And what is your victory? Your faith, the fact that you believe. Everything in life and reality is arrayed against you believing, is seeking to lie to you, deceive you, and lead you astray, and make it so you don't believe. If you come out of this life believing, you have gained a victory over, in that case, he calls it the world, but here, it's a victory over Satan, the liar, the deceiver. You've gained victory over him. You have crushed his head. So Eve's offspring are going to crush Satan's head, but yet you will crush its heel. Now that may very well be a reference to the crucifixion of Jesus. That could very well be. The offspring, Jesus is a child of God as well. And what's the most dramatic way in which Satan did any damage at all to the children of God? It seems like the most dramatic way is he orchestrated Jesus being crucified. So that may very well be where Satan crushed the heel of the offspring of the woman. To the wife, he said, as you increase, and I think he means your offspring, as you increase your offspring, I will increase your sorrows and grief. Why? Because you know what? You have just shown that you are evil little critters. And the evil little critter that you are, you're going to bring more of you into the world? I guarantee you it's going to increase sorrow and grief in your experience. As you increase your offspring, I will increase your sorrows and grief. And every parent knows that. I mean, the most grievous part of being a parent is to see sin have its way with your children and where it takes them and where it might take them and so on. I mean, the sorrow and grief that you experience because they're sinners. I will increase your sorrows and grief. In sorrow you will bring forth children. Same thing, basically saying the same thing another way. Now, a second point. And your desire shall be for your husband, but he will dominate you. Okay, your desire shall be for your husband. We're going to see exactly that same phrase, we would, if we had time, in Cain and Abel. Remember what God says to Cain? Sin's desire is for you, Cain. Exactly the same Hebrew. I think what he means is sin wants to dominate and control you, Cain. Don't let it. Well, he's saying to Eve, Eve, you're going to want to dominate and control your husband. Why? Because you're evil. You are an evil being, and the way that's going to manifest itself is you're going to want to dominate and control your husband. But he will dominate you because he's evil too. Out of his evil, will use his strength and will fight back, and it's not going to be pretty. And as bad as it is today in the ancient world, I think it was even worse. Men just were strong enough to literally dominate women, turn them into property if they so desired. And that's been the history of humanity, is sin manifesting itself in the male-female relationship in such a way that women wanted what they wanted, and men wanted what they wanted, and men were usually stronger and made life hell for the women sometimes. Then to Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife. Interesting. I've always noted that, but I don't think I've ever understood that before. So Eve was deceived, but Adam was not deceived. Adam simply listened to the voice of his wife. Adam, come and do this thing. Okay. Okay, let's disobey God. You know? Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I instructed you, saying, you shall not eat from it. I gave you an explicit commandment and you disobeyed it. Cursed will be the ground by reason of your deeds. In distress you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Both the thorn and thistle will spring up for you, and you will eat the plants of the wild. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the earth out of which you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Now, I think this is where it becomes important that this is a specific historical event and a historical account. When he says, cursed will be the ground by reason of your deeds, in distress you shall eat from it, and so on. As the account will go on, what does he do? He kicks him out of the garden. Food wouldn't have been a problem in the garden. Now, I think traditionally some people think that the tree's all shriveled up because of the fall, right? And that the curse is on the vegetation, and so there just isn't any food. But we see in a second, he sets cherubim to guard the way back to the garden so that they not go back and eat of the tree of life. It's still there. It's there, but he's going to be banished. That's his punishment. He's going to be banished And I think we talked about this last week. It would appear that Adam was created in the arid desert to the west of Eden, was created out of the dust of the ground there, and then God took him and placed him in the garden in the district, the region of Eden. Well, what he's going to do is banish him back. At what he ends up saying is, I'm going to send you back to the ground from which I made you, back to the desert, back to the arid, infertile ground that had been his origins. So what's there? Not much. So he's going to have to eke out a survival in a very hostile environment. That's his punishment. Cursed will be the ground by reason of your deeds, and distress you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Both the thorn and the thistle will spring up for you, and you will eat the plants of the wild. By the sweat of your own brow you will eat your food until you return to the earth out of which you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Now here's what I don't know. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Is he punishing him to die the death? Because if he's going to return to dust, if that's the final word, then that's exactly what the death is. The final ultimate destruction of Adam. So unlike Eve, who is the mother of the children of God, who we know are recipients of mercy, and therefore we can infer Eve is going to be granted mercy. Maybe not Adam. Now I don't know, because there are things coming up later in the account that kind of could take you the other direction, but it's kind of difficult to tell what exactly God is saying, but it's entirely possible that they have differential fates. Eve is going to receive mercy and life, and Adam is going to destruction because of what he did. Now notice, now Adam named his wife Chava, translated Eve in English. Now Adam named his wife Chava. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation, it translates it Zoe, life. Eve's name was life. And I take it that there must be some kind of correlation between the name in Hebrew and life here. Now Adam named his wife Chava because she was the mother of all who would have life. Now I've always taken that to be the obvious, because every living creature, every living human being is going to ultimately have you as their ancestor. No duh. Okay. I think Adam is saying something way more profound than that. I think he has understood what God has said to Eve. I will put enmity between you and the snake, and between your offspring and his offspring. And it will crush his head, and even though he will bruise you on the heel. I think Adam has recognized that God is promising mercy and a certain kind of destiny for Eve. She's going to be the mother of all who gain eternal life. She's the mother of those who will have life. Then the God Yahweh. Now, does that mean that Adam is not the father of all who will have life? Maybe so. I mean, there's another indication that maybe they don't have the same fate. Then the God Yahweh, then the God Yahweh made clothing out of animal hide for Adam and his wife and clothed them. And the God Yahweh said, behold, the human creature is like one who knows good and evil apart from us. In English, that usually gets translated, the human creature is like one of us in knowing good and evil. But it doesn't have to be translated that way. I think rather, he's not saying he's like one of us in knowing good and evil. It's behold, the human creature is like one who knows good and evil apart from. The preposition can mean separate from, independent of, outside of us. That's the problem, right? That's why I think that's more likely what is being said. The human creature is like one who knows good and evil apart from us, not listening to us, independently of us, acting autonomously from us. Well, that's not good. And now, might he perhaps reach out his hand and take even from the tree of life? I think this should be taken as a question, not a statement. And now, might he perhaps reach out his hand and take even from the tree of life? And shall he have life into the eternal age? So, what's the significance of eating of the tree of life? To eat from the tree of life signifies the fact that the one eating from the tree of life is worthy of being granted life. So the question here is, okay, here's this creature who knows good and evil apart from us, is not listening to us in their deciding what they will and will not do, what's appropriate action and what's not. Are we going to give such a creature life? No. So we must not allow it. We must not allow him to eat from the tree of life, because that would signify something that ain't true. That he's worthy of life. And the God Yahweh banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken in the west. He cast Adam out and established him there in the arid desert to the west. In the east, toward the Garden of Eden, he stationed the cherubim with their gleaming, flashing sword to guard the way to the tree of life. So to prevent him from coming back to the garden and eating from the tree of life, he literally guarded the path with cherubim, whatever they are. And I don't know. I don't know if they look like the cherubim in Babylonian art or whether that's a later invention. I don't know. Okay, questions? Yeah.
This might be too off topic. I don't know. Where he's placing him, Adam, back into the West, I'll tell you what I'm trying to reconcile in my head is I'm trying to reconcile the story of evolution and this story.
Oh.
So where he's placing him back that he took him out of, had that already, earlier in Genesis, is that what was already created and they were plucked out of that? Is that
that's possible.
Okay.
I think the first account in Genesis 1, there's no incompatibility with evolution necessarily.
I agree.
In the Genesis 1.
Right.
This account is harder to reconcile with evolutionary theory, because you have him being fashioned out of the dust of the ground. Mm-hmm. Now you can imagine that just being a way of describing millions or billions of years of starting with a one-cell animal and somehow growing a human organism out of that. But okay, maybe. Yeah. But in any case, he took him out of the ground and he breathed in him the breath of life, and he became a living nephesh person, I think. So at the very least, turning this organism into a human creature was not an evolutionary process. It was a creative act of God. At the very least, that has to be an act of direct divine creation, not using evolutionary processes, it seems to me.
That makes more sense to me as well. But the world that he's dropping him into may have been the world that he's talking about in Genesis 1, and might have already been growing and moving, and he could be plopping him into with tigers and lions and stuff. For all we know.
Say that again.
There could be a whole world of animals that are already going on.
I think that absolutely has to be the case. I mean, I think it depends on how you translate it into English, but I think it should be translated, how did I put it? Back at paragraph 1, in the time when the God Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, even before any plant of the field was on the land, and before any grass of the field had sprung up. No, that's not the right place. Paragraph 3. No. Guess it's not until he names the animals, but we would put it, I think, in a past perfect tense.
Okay.
The animals that he had created. I mean, some of our English translations make it sound like you've got a garden and you've got a human being there.
Mm-hmm.
And then God says, okay, I'm going to create some animals now, and I'll create the animals and bring them to Adam to see what he will name them. I don't think that's right. You have a whole world of animals that already exists, but now he's inviting Adam to study, investigate, and learn about these animals and name them. And the reason for that is because God wants to make a helper corresponding to him, and he's having him see whether such a being already exists, or whether he's going to have to create one that's completely new and different and unlike anything that he's created up till now. And I think that's what he's showing Adam. It's going to have to be something new and different and completely unprecedented in his experience.
Okay, thank you.
So I think I might be missing something, but here at the very end there, you had the tree of life part. And you had said previously that the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil are it's the same tree.
Yeah.
So I'm missing then what the significance of him saying, and he might perhaps now reach out and take from the tree. Isn't that what he's already did?
They already ate from it in disobedience from God. But what would it mean to allow them to continue eating it and to go on eating it? It would mean that they were worthy of life. Not going to let it happen.
I see. So
they're not worthy of life.
Got it. Thank you.
I'd never noticed this before, but where he's talking about Eve's offspring crushing the head of the enemy and then it bruising the offspring's heel and stuff. Having that image of like a snake that seems to be being played off of, that picture of like, you go along and you kill the snake by stepping on it and smashing its head or something.
Yeah.
That it might hurt you in that process. It might get you, it might bite you, but you're still bigger. Like you'll still win because it'll be dead, and that momentary pain will not sort of it won't ruin your victory, even though it might be a price that you have to pay. Yeah. That's very interesting because later on he talks to Cain about if sin wants to master you or something like that, but you can overcome it.
You must overcome
it. Yeah, and so it seems like there's this picture even from the beginning of like if they do decide to tangle with the enemy, they'll win. Like they can be they're being sort of guaranteed of that. There's a price that they're going to pay. There's a cost that it will come at, but that they will have victory over that. That's
if
really
they are the offspring of the woman.
Yeah. Well, they might not decide to tangle with it otherwise. It's kind of I mean, that there might be this fear of like it's intimidating, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I think that's right.
I had always taken that he was going to send him back to the west and to dust he was going to return. Was part of the curse was somehow God had turned off entropy, and when he put them in the garden, and part of this curse is I'm turning entropy back on, and you will decay. How is it? Why is that not easier to? I just was that something you thought about? Had that ever crossed?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's how I
always
back
thought
under
about
the
it.
old paradigm. What else can you do? But I mean, a perfect world has to be an anentropic world, and if it's going to be eternal and last forever and be perfect in that sense, so somehow the whole laws of physics have to be transformed in an instant. And the thing that's always bothered me in reading the fall into here is you've got a cosmic event so significant that we go from an anentropic universe to an entropic universe, and there's not even a little bang. I mean, nothing in the account gives you any indication at all that anything cataclysmic has happened. Well, you can't get more cataclysmic than going from anentropic to entropic, to a perfect universe, to a decaying universe. I mean, everything in physics has to be transformed by that.
Sure.
And you'd think that the record would indicate something that would point you in that direction. The fact that you don't strongly suggests to me that God created an entropic universe from the get-go. At least this phase of creation. There's going to be a new creation, a new heavens and a new earth, which he always intended. That was always his eternal plan. But what he created now was just the first chapter of the narrative that's going to end there. But it's not that, my apologies to Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but we don't have to get back to the garden. It's not, we don't go back to the garden, we go forward to the end point that God had always had in mind from the very beginning. The new heavens and the new earth that will be more glorious than anything he ever created to start with.
Thank you for this. Really appreciate this provocative and illuminating discussion. Thank you. If you could briefly comment on the notion about the curses and why God would come down so hard on Adam for his piece in this story. Perhaps it could be the notion that he was so quick to blame his wife so fast without a thought. He just threw Hava right under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps this was even the final test for Odom that Hashem was waiting. And to hear him be so fast to take no responsibility and blame his wife immediately, that this really was the thing that really angered Hashem the most. Perhaps.
Could be. It's hard to know because in a sense, everything that Eve says and everything that Adam says are actually true. He did. I mean, Eve just said. How did he put it?
My wife that you gave to me.
Yeah, the wife whom you gave to me. That one gave to me from the tree, and I ate. Well, it's not wrong. It's not false. I think subtly. I think that's a great point. The wife whom you gave to me. Let me remind you. So that may be in part trying to shift the blame, but for the most part, it's a relatively straightforward and innocent claim. She gave it to me, and I took it. And then what he blames him for is you listen to the voice of your wife, and then immediately he says, let's see. Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I instructed you, saying, you shall not eat from it, cursed will be, so on. So I think that's why he's coming down so hard on him, is that unlike Eve, who at least was deceived into thinking she was doing something pleasing to God, that wasn't true of you, Adam. You listened to your wife instead of listening to me, exactly, and totally disregarded what I had told you. And I think that's why he's getting the harsher treatment. And the way Paul puts it in 1 Timothy is Adam was not deceived, but Eve, being quite deceived, fell into transgression. Now, I think what he's doing is reading that here, is that Adam just listened to the voice of his wife. There was no deception involved. He just did what she said to do. But Eve, it was more subtle. She had been tricked by Satan into thinking she was actually doing something good.
I think throwing Eve under the bus is just what we do when we don't want to get
That's true. Yeah,
busted.
that's true. Yeah, I think there is that.
You want to justify
The wife
ourselves
whom
and make
you
somebody
gave
else
me.
the problem. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you.